Hello everybody, this is Enrico and welcome back to Hardware Hackers. Today we have a new appearance on the channel. I'd like to introduce Liam. This will be his first video on the channel and there will be more to come. So sit tight and relax and enjoy the video. Take it away.
Gameboy Color. The console's so good they forgot how to spell it. Oh yeah, today on Hardware Hackers what we're going to be doing is removing this AA system. The AA system is great for burning a hole in your wallet if you play it a lot. As I remember as a kid, trying to go around stealing the AA's out of everything. TV remotes, then we had Walkmans at the time. Yes, I'm too young for that. Oh well, my parents are older. And even the Discman. It was such a toss-up whether you wanted to listen to music while you went out or play a game while you went out. We had to deal with the hard decisions in life. But, because the AA system's so bad, why not bring it into the 21st century? Lithium ion, with the also beautiful USB-C. So, to get into this mod, you're going to need, well, three things. A Gameboy Color, obviously. A TP4056 module. Now these can be found in a variety of ways. This one is the USB-C variant, but you can also get one with a mini USB and also a micro USB, so pick whichever one suits you, but USB-C is the future, so that's the way we're going. And then a lithium-ion battery. The thing with a lithium-ion battery is, they're a pain in the ass to find the right size. The right size for this mod is actually a 1034-50, which is 10mm thick, 34mm wide and 50mm long. Now, I'm lazy and didn't feel like waiting 6 years for it to come from AliExpress. So I just found a cheap ass PS4 battery and I'm going to make it work. So, we actually get a lot more milliamp hours with this, because if it decides to focus, you'll notice it's 2200 milliamp. So it's going to give you a good amount of playtime, considering that the Game Boy Advance was only about 600 if I remember correctly. So that compared to that, for good old AA's, should be a major upgrade. So then, the first thing that you're going to need is obviously the tri-wing screwdriver. Oh yeah. Because what we're going to do is, we're going to take it apart. After you've unscrewed all the screws on the back, you want to gently wiggle it, especially if it's never been opened. It will be a little bit tight, and then you can just drop it to one side. And now we have the rear exposed. This is where all the magic happens and all the pixies dance around to make the pixels display on your screen in the perfect way to play Pokemon. So, after that, obviously, these are no longer tri-wing heads, they are Phillips heads. So grab any old small Phillips screwdriver, you don't need much specialised equipment for this, and start disassembling the motherboard. Screen's left there along with the power button and everything else. So, I'm going to remove these screws as they're still stuck into the PCB, and we're going to set them down in the original shell where they can't be lost. And that shell can be pushed up and out of the way. So, the next step from here would normally be to clean everything down, but I'm very lazy and this honestly is not the most disgusting board I've ever seen. I've seen much, much worse than this. Some boards I've seen have been built up with there's no other way to describe it than good old finger cheese. It's not the most cleansly of hobby for a beginner. It's one thing definitely to know. So, the two battery terminals are here. The other one is inside the shell. You have your negative and you have your positive. They're marked down on the motherboard. I'm not sure if you can see that, but they're marked on the motherboard, so it's kind of hard to get them mixed up. But for this mod, we don't need these terminals anymore. So, flip it over to the screen side and get your soldering iron ready. Now for desoldering, what I like to do is, I like to add more solder than is already there. It just seems to help melt it down faster, especially when you're dealing with such a massive component like this. It can always be a pain to remove things that are this large because they like to soak up most of the heat that the soldering iron's putting into it. As you can see here, it's going to be a pain to remove this, especially when I broke my PCB stand, which would have made this a lot easier. Never moved the battery cover out, was not a good idea. Big chance I was going to melt that. And then, there we go. We have no way to power your Game Boy Pocket. Tune back in next. No, I'm joking. So, after we've done this, you might want to clean up the solder a bit because if you're anything like me, you're not the cleanest solderer. No, that can't be right. Either way, if you're anything like me, you normally end up getting a few splats of solder everywhere. Now personally, this is just my preference. I like to cover the pads again because they're two separate holes. I just like to turn them back into one. You can never go wrong with a little too much solder, unless you're going to start arcing things, that is. But that's just my preference. I like to clean things up. So, we're almost done. Just got to fill these in a little bit. That's a bit of a cold joint. That's better. Right, so now you may be wondering, what are we doing now? And what we're doing now is, we are going to prep the PCB. Well, not quite prep the PCB, but more get things ready. So if you notice on the back here, there isn't all too much space where we can stick anything. It's the joy of handhelds, you're working in very, very tight spaces. So our only real option is to stick this right there, just on the edge. Because we can't stick it here, we can't stick it there, we may be able to stick it there, but it'll be a bit of a pain. It might be worth investigating though in a future video. Let's have a look. Come on, place the speaker in. Lift the ribbon out of the way, drop you down. Oh, it may well be possible to put it here, but you're also risking arcing and all sorts because of the processors up here. And I think that may well be a RAM chip that it's impeding, so it doesn't seem like the wisest of solutions. So anyway, back to the original plan. What we'll do is, we'll put this connector right here. And it's out of the way, it's nice and clean. It is what it is, it's done. But you may be thinking, how exactly are we going to fit a battery in there? And that's a good question. the battery is going to sit here. And if you notice, it barely fits just there. It only just squeezes in, especially on this side where it sits quite high because of the motherboard. Well, the motherboard, because of the TP4056, the charging module. And the thing is, that is okay, because if you look on here, the back of it bulges out a little. And that back bulge will allow for this thicker battery to go in, especially after we've done a small bit of shell modification. In other words, butchering it to make things fit, because I don't have the right tools on hand at the minute. So, what we want to do is, we want to connect this to the output, or to the input of the Game Boy. So you may notice, it's going to be hard to show, but you may notice some very, very tiny writing. And on this tiny writing, there is your positive out, and your battery input, positive, and your negative battery input, and then your negative output. These two pads are inputs in case you want to move this somewhere else. You can desolder this, or you can leave it on and just add another input later on. But that's entirely up to you. That depends on how it goes. So, after that, back to the original thing, we're going to place that here. It would be ideal to get kept on tape or some other form of things just to make sure you're not shorting any of these little teeny tiny vias. But you gotta do what you gotta do. And I don't have that on hand right now. So we're gonna place that here. Just let it sit. It doesn't have to do anything special at the minute. And when it's sat there, you want to grab some random wire. This probably isn't. No, this wouldn't be very good wire. This is some random wire I've pulled out of an old IDE connector. Well, not connector, cable. Or floppy cable. It's a bit shit. It's very, very thin. So I wouldn't trust it personally. Unless it's as thick as the battery you're using. Personally, I wouldn't trust it. Especially since this is 2 and it's only just a tad thicker than the original cable. So I wouldn't trust this. So what I'm going to use instead is a pair of old jumper connectors. You know, the stuff you use for breadboards. These are great. They're extremely cheap. You can pick them up anywhere, and obviously you've got many, many colours, so it's easy to trace back which thing's which. And for just ease, what I'm going to do right now is, I'm going to do some blasphemy. I'm going to peel it apart, so that I can get a red connection, like that, and a black connection. Just because it keeps it pretty universal. Everyone knows negative, positive, red, black, wrong way around, but you get my point. So, after that sacrifice has been made, what we're going to want to do is plug my headphones back in, because I knocked them out as I stood up. And then, these jumpers have a little pin on the end. Completely useless to us. So we pick up the flush cutters and we just snip. I'm not really going to use these for any breadboard projects because I haven't been into anything like Arduino wise lately. It's just kind of got boring for me a few years back after I did a load of it back at school. I did too much and that was it. I don't know. Maybe I'll come back to it one day. It might make some interesting videos. So, the wires are obviously rather long, and if you're anything like me, you don't want it. You want it all to look nice and clean, tidy, all of that. So, first thing we're going to do is we're going to solder it to the connection. Connection just here. We're going to start with positive, as I have red in my hand, and what we're going to do is grab some solder, add some extra solder to this pad, because we don't want to, it might be a pain because of all the solder on the other side, so we're just going to have to pull it on. Oh, no, it's not going to like that because it's all pulling out the other side. So, just going to heat it up, let it fall through a bit, you know, give us some nice amount of solder on the other side. it's better than it was. It's nothing great. But like I say, because we had red in our hand at the time, we're going to use red. So you can strip wires properly, or you can be an animal like me and just pull the actual thing off. You don't need much. You just need to pull just enough insulation off so that you can actually solder it. Because there's no point trying to solder for insulation, as that will make a really bad connection that just isn't worth doing. So the the positive output is just here on the TP4056. Just tin that. We might as well tin all the connections we're going to use, just because it saves a little bit of effort later on. Right, so we have that. We have a positive. Now, I would usually use flux. These may be a bit crusty of connection because I don't have any flux right now. My flux is crap. Came with the soldering iron, and well, if you know anything about cheap kits on Amazon, that says it all. So, have a nice connection just there. And now we might as well do the negative as well. Strip it out. Did it well that time. Strip it off like an animal again. Just using my nails. Just got out of the habit of using my teeth lately, which, well, I think that's even more animalistic, to be honest. Oh. Yeah, also, that's a tip. Rather than use your whole reel in your way, just pull a random piece off and it holds its shape quite well. So you can just have your solder stand itself up while you solder your wires together. It makes life a lot easier. And you use a lot less solder in my experience. It's just one of those things I've picked up along the way. Now, straight back on here. And now we have two nice long tails. And if you look, these two nice long tails are way too nice and long. Which is always a good thing, because you can always trim it down, you can never add it back on. It's a great rule to live by. So, personally I like to keep my cables all neat and organised. So, what I'm going to do is place that just here. You want that right up against the edge so that USB connection can stick out just a little bit so it can go through the plastic of the shell. And then we need to estimate how much wire we need. So on there, we only need just about that much. We'll cut it a little longer just in case. And then up here, I like to follow the same paths. So we only need that much. We'll cut it a bit long as well, just because it gives a nice bit of leeway, a little bit of wiggle room just in case. So start with negative this time, just because why not switch things up? Back to my animalistic ways, I really don't recommend that. It's just how I've always done it, so it's a really hard habit to break. And again, just tap some white, tap some solder on it, tin your connections. Always tin your connections because it makes life so much easier you wouldn't believe. And then we'll spin this around because it makes my life easier approaching from this angle. And we'll solder that well, first off, I'm just going to give my iron a quick clean, as it's not giving out heat very nicely. Should get into the habit of cleaning my iron more often. But if you heat up the connection here, it is still a through hole connection, so you can just heat it up and then you can just stick it in. It's fine. Just like that. And now you can flip it that way. As you notice, it's got a nice bit of excess on there just to give it some nice wiggle room. It can sit down all comfortably and we still have enough, you know, just a bit of leeway. It's always nice to have leeway because you can always take away some wire, but you can never add the wire back on without heat shrinking and going for a lot more effort than needed. You might as well just replace the whole wire if you do that. Then again, run it up and then stick it there. I'm going to cut it about, probably cut it about where my fingers are, because when we stripped it back, it will be just about the right length. And I'll keep saying this every time I do it. I do not recommend stripping wire like I do. It is a bit animalistic, but at least it's better than when I used to take a lighter to it. So, move this out of the way. And this one's pretty short, so I'm going to grab it with the tweezers just to make sure that I get a nice grip without burning my fingers off. The amount of times I've burnt myself with a soldering iron is not fun. So, push that here over this side because it gives us more leeway. Don't have to push it across as much circuit board. Give the wire a quick bend. It's braided. It's not going to matter. And I think, you know what? No, I'm just going to risk taking my fingers off. It'll be fine. You know, I've got 9 more of them. Okay, it took a lot less time than I expected, so turns out I would have been fine. Oop, just gone behind there. And there we go. Again, there's a little extra wire. We can't go wrong with an little extra wire. So, just gonna squish it back a little. And then once we've found the final position, we can just stick a dab of super glue. That's how I do it. It's not exactly the most recommended way, because if it ever dies you can't really replace it. But, it gets the job done, and it gets the job done well. So, I can't argue. Get rid of all this excess wire that we don't need anymore, just throw it over there. It's nice to have a scrap bin of random bits, because these random bits come in useful a lot more often than you think. I really do mean it, a lot more often than you think. Everything I've ever taken apart that was broken, I have always kept the wire off, just because it makes such a difference. Every time, there's always some random gauge that you can't find, or you're trying to replace a wire in something else. But, now we're on the most important part. The battery. This part's extremely important, especially right now, because I have something very important for you people to notice. Obviously there's 2 wires coming out of here. You have your negative and you have your positive. So, separate these wires out, spread them apart. You know, we don't need the JST connector on the end. We're getting rid of it. But never, and I seriously mean never, just don't do it, it's not worth the risk, cut both wires at once. You will cause a very big spark or an arc, depending on, you know, obviously depending on how much power the battery has. But either way, even though it is a 1S cell, it's not worth the risk. So always cut the connectors off 1 wire at a time. Because if I cut through both, these are metal, they just arc. And it's not a fun time, especially when it's a lipo. They're not the safest of things to work with. But now we at least have a lipo ready. Well, almost. So, this lipo is going to sit right here. Or even, no, it's going to sit the other way around, because the little protection board makes it thicker on that side, and that allows some more space for the TP. And what we're going to do, same thing again. I'm going to use my archaic method. Maybe not this time. No, yeah, we're going to try it. There we go. And then, there we go. We have stripped off a very teeny tiny bit of the end of that. But, again, I do not recommend, just because I have screwed up a fair few things doing it that way before. I just do not learn my lesson easily, apparently. So, poke it up. And obviously, since your wires stand up, it just makes it very easy to put your solder on. Quick bit of tin. and another quick bit of tin. So now we are ready. And make sure you get this the right way around, because you will damage the protection surgery within this. And what will happen is your TP4056 just dies. So the negative is just here, and then the positive goes on the other internal terminal. Just remember that the positives are always on the same side, and so are the negatives. That only goes for this module though, so don't use that as a rule of thumb. There will always be that one convoluted device where nothing makes sense. And I mean nothing. There is always that one thing that confuses every single one and every single thing. So we have this in place, and we could flip it over, but if you notice, there's not much wire on, so it has a lot of overhang. So we flip it, push it across, and that gives you a nice bit of slack on the wire, and also means it sits nicely behind that capacitor and tucked up against the cartridge slot port. And that's it. Really, we should be connecting that in place right now, but I don't think we should put everything perfectly in place until we've got it all tested and made sure it's working. Now then, you can just drop this connection in. Oh, you've got to do it straight though, obviously. And then shut that, shut the other clip, and if you notice, we're all good. So flip it over, here comes the moment of truth. It works just fine. So we have a perfectly working Game Boy, still going, and now you may be thinking, so how is this all meant to sit in place and actually work? And this is where the nice bit of butchery comes in place. So we have to pop these back off. I'm not using the tweezers this time, because we can use your fingernails, it's just best practice to use something other than that, because your fingernails aren't quite as precise as a pair of nice tweezers. But you are going to make do, won't you, sometimes. Some things you can always get away with. So push that back, have that sit there.
Two hours later.
And there we go. So what we're going to do now is I am going to run away for a second, because I have forgotten the super glue, which is, you know, never the greatest of steps. It's something that I should have came prepared with. But I should be back in a second, as I've left my shit.
2 hours later.
I've gotten the super glue, and what we're going to do is we're just going to make sure this sits happily behind that capacitor while we tweak this about and make sure that PCB edge lines up with the edge of that. Now, here comes the magic of super glue. We only need the tiniest dab, and I mean the tiniest dab, because this shit is very cheap, and it's also very, very watery. Personally, I prefer the gel kind, but we don't have that option right now. So we're going to add the tiniest drop. That's it. And the tiniest drop just on the other side too. And then we sit here and we stare into the distance for a while. So this may be time lapsed, I may cut this out, but that's just how it is right now. So that was a mistake. I didn't realise my camera shuts off after a while of recording. So all I've done is, I'll just reenact it. I've took my snips, and I've gone down the edge of each of the little supports next to the battery. I've snipped it on both sides, and then I've grabbed my tweezers, and I've just been rocking it back and forth and kept on going until little pieces come out. And that's enough for the battery supports right now, because obviously we're gonna rework this later on to make it a lot cleaner. But for now, it's completely fine. Now one of the things is, cutting this away isn't the easiest task. This is a lot easier done with a Dremel. So, I would fully recommend using a Dremel, but you want to get rid of everything except for these two little notches here, because this battery colour hooks into them, and that's half of what gives it stability. As you can see, it doesn't actually go all the way up against it. You may be able to see that, you may not. Let me try and get closer to the camera. So that goes in there like that, and you may be able to notice there is a slight gap. So that's fine if you get rid of that bottom bit just under there, but you also don't want to get rid of this little lip there, because that's what that latches under. You may be able to notice on the edge of the clip there is a little two notches, and that's what holds it in place. So what we'll do now is remove this whole crap out of the way, and then we go back to snipping this shit away. This might take a while, because like I say, I only have tin snips at the minute. I accidentally threw away the wrong bag which had all my Dremel bits in, so I have a Dremel with no bits, which is f***ing useless. It's like having a car with no wheels. You know, good stuff. Right, there we go. It finally fits. So, personally, I would definitely recommend sanding this down. You may notice it's a little rattly, but I would personally, after you put the battery cover on, it gets rid of all that. So that's fine. You know, we still got power. It's great. Turn it over, drop it back out. And now we have the joy of how the hell do we work out exactly where the power port is. So we need to make a small hole where the USB-C can come out the side. So we'll set down into place, and it looks like we're right about... Whoa, there's a nice scratch on there. Completely lost my footing. So, how I'm going to work this out is I'm going to go from each edge, find about the middle roughly. So then, yeah, we've got all these Gameboy chips everywhere. I'll just shove them to the side for now. And I want to do something kind of gross. Flip it over this way, obviously you notice that it sits like this. Drop the game battery in place. It all sits in the right spot. So, yeah, this is kind of gross. Dab that just there. Then pull it over, and we're done. And you've got to lay your battery down in place before you can do anything. And with it all the way down, I still don't think it's quite in place. Oh, no, there we go. It can plug in now. Yeah, it's in a bit of an awkward spot, but if you hold it down here, you can still play quite happily while charging. Even though I wouldn't recommend, because the TP4056 can't regulate the battery current very well while it's charging. But also, you're going to notice you're going to need a slightly longer charger. So the way to get around that is, I don't have a cable on hand right now. The way to get around that is to just take an X-Acto blade or whatever, because you can cut back quite far on these. You'd be quite surprised. So, watch your fingers when you do this, because it's not exactly the safest method of doing these things, but at the same time, it works. So, now you've got that, and as you'll see, I've took off way too much, or way more than I needed. So, but either way, it works completely fine. Now plug all the way in like that, and it'll be good. Now one thing I would recommend is to stick a little bit of foam in here, stop the rattle, because sometimes the battery door won't stop all the rattle. So then, we're going to start putting this together in a second. So we adapted it a little more yet again, because I was a mong and I did it a little bit too high. So the hole is extremely crusty. I could clean it up if I wanted to, but that requires a lot more effort. As you can see, it plugs in all fine, so I'm happy with that. Because, say I did it just by melting it, I'm quite happy yet again. So now what we're going to do is pull this out, flip it over just so you know you're not putting too much stress on the solder joints of the battery, excuse me. And then just come here, move all this stuff out of the way, place it down into here. So, yes, there was only 3 3 screw connections. You got your 1, 2, and 3. So, we've almost covered that up, so that's one thing that you got to be careful about. But I also would recommend actually gluing that a little further outwards, as I underestimated it quite a bit this time. Now we've got this done, and then we flip it back over, stick it there, and we're set. Right. So that's it. That's all in place. And now the last thing we have to do is to stick the back on. So, let me just slap that into that connector over here. Oh mind you, I should probably put this back in its stand before I burn myself. Now, stick this into the USB just here. And then, turn it to the side. Now, you can't just plug it in because how I've done it, it's sat way too deep. So, what we need to do is, first off, slight modification, just say about 2-3 mil. The best way to do it is to just trim it down little bit by little bit, just because then you don't end up with a dodgy little cut on it, so it's not left too long and it still has all the support from the rubber it needs. So now measure it off, that we'll plug in, hear it click, it's all the way in. And you won't really be able to see it, which is a shame. The only way you can see it really is if I could turn this light off, you may be able to see it if I cup it. No, it doesn't really come across on camera. There's a very small red indicator light. You can kind of see it just through the hole there. Maybe like that, you can see it. No, it doesn't appear like it. But trust me, it's there. So that charges like that. The thing with it is, I wouldn't play this while charging it, because if you do that, what will happen is you will actually not be charging the battery correctly, because you'll be drawing from it at the same time as charging it, which sure is great on modern systems, but the TP4056 chip cannot handle that. So the way I would say is just play it as is, and then just stop playing when you start playing. Just make sure you don't charge and play at the same time, as you know, it just causes battery degradation on a chip like this, as you're constantly sucking it out as you're trying to force it in. Editor's note, that's what she said. It's just not healthy for the battery because it's not regulated properly. Oh yeah. as I've said, that's that. I don't think the only Game Boy Color game I have on hand is Ghostbusters. So, let me turn the light back on. As you can see, everything's working fine. It's all completely playable. I can go ahead, I can play the game, and it all just works fine. Every button works. It's completely fine. So, that's it. After all that, thank you for tuning in to Hardware Hackers. We'll see you again next time.